Hello again, everybody. Today we're going to be doing a continuation from the tetraamine copper sulfate experiment. That was my very first video. We're going to do two things today. We're going to precipitate it, and we're going to make little copper sulfate forms out of it. What you're all going to need for this one is the solution of tetraamine copper sulfate that can be produced by reaction of ammonium hydroxide with copper sulfate solution. You're going to need some copper sulfate solution, some isopropyl or rubbing alcohol. Ethanol works best, but I didn't have any ethanol. Some pipettes, and I like to use a needle for handling the tetraamine copper sulfate because of its fumes. And you're also going to need some test tubes. Now the first experiment is we are going to precipitate it. The first experiment we're going to do today with the tetraamine copper sulfate is to precipitate it into its crystal or solid form. The first thing you're going to want to do is take one of your test tubes and fill it with, I'd say, about 5 milliliters of isopropyl rubbing alcohol or ethanol. Again, I didn't have any ethanol, so I just used rubbing alcohol. It'll work the same. As you can see, I've already done that. Next, what you want to do, using the needle, or if you don't have a needle, a pipette, is pull about half a milliliter of the tetraamine copper sulfate into your collection device. And then squirt it directly into the alcohol. Now, it looks cloudy blue right now, which is normal. I already have some going, so I'll just show you that instead. After a while, it'll look like this, where most of the blue settles on the bottom. The blue can then be separated via a filter from the alcohol, and the solid TACS can be recovered. Let's check in again on our first experiment, the precipitation of TACS, and as you can see, most of the crystals have formed at the bottom. Now, all you have to do to obtain the solid crystals is to separate the alcohol from the precipitate with a filter, which can be as simple as a coffee filter or as complex as a lab filter. Alright, our second experiment today, we are going to be using TACS, alcohol, and copper sulfate to make what are known as tracer patterns. First off, you put your 5 or 10 milliliters of alcohol, whether that be ethanol or isopropyl, into your test tube, which I've already done. Next, you mix, I'd say, about 2 milliliters of copper sulfate solution into the alcohol until it turns a light blue, just a little bit lighter than the copper sulfate solution. You can set that aside, and next you pull a very small amount, maybe 1/10 of a milliliter of TACS into your collection vial, whether that be a pipette or a needle. With a needle, the next step is a little tricky because you're only supposed to add 1 drop. With a needle, it's easy to overdo. So next, you put in 1 drop at a time of TACS. And what happens is the copper sulfate reacts with the TACS to make the trail more visible, and then the alcohol precipitates the TACS and the reacted copper sulfate to make visible trails that seem to linger in the solution. Do one more here. Unfortunately, you can't really pour those trails out. They don't really want to come out unless you wait for the alcohol to vaporize, which takes a very long time. But it's just kind of a cool experiment. It's a neat party trick.